Welcome to the webinar. Um, this is for the Victims and Survivors of Crime Week. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kurt Goddard. I am a lawyer and the Executive Director of Legal and Public Affairs at Inclusion Canada. I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I'm excited to guide you through this important discussion on the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines. Listen, Include, Respect is a tool developed by Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International, with input from over 1,500 self-advocates, families, and disability organizations across 100 countries. Before we begin, we would like to run through some housekeeping and accessibility items with you. Today's event will be 1 hour long, with about 40 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of question and answers. This event will be presented in English, French simultaneous interpretation, ASL, LSQ, and English and French cart captioning are also provided. To turn on English and French cart captioning, please click the links provided in the chat box. The cart captions will appear in a new window. Using the toolbar, along the top of the window, you can adjust the caption size, font style, and color. You can also change the background color. To turn on French simultaneous interpretation, please go to the toolbar along the bottom of your screen and click the arrow next to the interpretation button. An options menu will appear. Click French. You will now be able to hear the French interpreter, as well as the original audio at a much lower level. If we would like to remove the original English audio, click the interpretation button again and select Mute Original Audio. You will now hear the French interpreter only. We are also pleased to have American Sign Language, ASL, and Langue des Signes du Québec, LSQ, interpreters with us today. ASL and LSQ interpreters will be visible on camera. The interpreters have labeled themselves as ASL1, LSQ1 on their video to make it easier for you to locate them. We will be spotlighting ASL and LSQ interpreters so that their video always remains visible on your screen. To make sure that you are able to see both the panelist who is speaking and the interpreter at the same time, we recommend you use a side-by-side view. To set a side-by-side view, click on the view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, then click Side-by-Side Gallery. There will be a question and answer at the end of the presentation. You can submit questions using the Q&A function. You can open this feature by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A box can be moved by clicking and dragging it. You can close the Q&A by clicking the red dot in the upper left-hand corner. We understand that the Q&A box might not be accessible format for everyone, so questions can also be submitted by email to forum, that's F-O-R-U-M, at Inclusion Canada, INCLUSIONCANADA.ca, forum@inclusioncanada.ca. Because of the large number of people participating in today's webinar, it will not be possible to respond to all questions. If you have technical difficulties, please email us at forum@inclusioncanada.ca, and we will do our best to help you. To avoid common issues, please make sure you are watching the webinar from a location with a strong internet connection and that your computer's volume is turned on. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this webinar is supported by Justice Canada as part of Victims and Survivors of Crime Week. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing in the future. If you would like a copy or have suggestions about other groups or organizations who may benefit from the information, please let us know. Okay, let's begin. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit and First Nations people and the chosen home of the Métis. Our first speaker today is Ailish Intia from Inclusion International. Tia is a Listen, Include, Respect consultant, and Ailish is a self-advocacy program manager. So with that, over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. What is Listen, Include, Respect? We're going to talk to you about that. Listen, Include, Respect is a set of guidelines and tools for all types of organizations created by the networks of Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International. The guidelines help organizations of all types to be more inclusive of people with intellectual disabilities. Next slide, please. The aim of the guidelines is to help organizations remove barriers so that people with intellectual disabilities get information in a way that we understand, can share our ideas, experience, and knowledge alongside everyone else, are part of process and can make decisions at every level, are treated as an equal part of the team, for example, as staff members, as parts of boards and committees and projects and users of services. Next slide, please. Organizations have a responsibility to be accessible, inclusive of everyone, and to make sure that people with intellectual disabilities have our rights to accessibility and to take part are respected. Including people with intellectual disabilities is a long process of changing the way we think and changing the way we do things. We know organizations need help with tools and support. The guidelines can help understand what changes to be made and how. Next slide, please. The guidelines give organizations practical advice and how to checklists to follow, which can help organizations to remove the barriers that are in the way of people with intellectual disabilities. You can look more on that on listenincluderespect.com. Here again, on the next slide, please, is some ways of types of meetings. You can look under there and it shows you how to run some meetings, conferences, and other things. Next slide. See, it gets in there and talks about, it gives you examples of ways to do that. Next slide. As was said before, who contributes to the guidelines? Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International worked with our networks to make listenincluderespect.com. 350 organizations from 100 countries took part. More than 1,500 people gave us feedback through 60 inclusive consultations. Next slide, please. As you can see the map, the countries in that aqua blue color or turquoise helped create the guidelines. Next slide, please. The principles are the main ideas we heard from our network, which an inclusive organization follows. The principles underpin all the checklists of how the principles of the guidelines are. The principles are believing in inclusion, self-advocate leadership, understanding awareness, accessible communication, reasonable accommodations, valuing the process of working together, using the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability, CRPD, as our guide, and understanding inclusion is a journey. Next slide, please. What does this mean for access to justice? We can use the guidelines and principles to help each other of our work to be better and more accessible, help our systems to be more inclusive, and include people to take part. Next slide, please. What does this mean for people working in access to justice, understanding and awareness, understanding and challenging stereotypes, asking about support needs and providing reasonable accommodations, being respectful and patient, involving supporters like family members when needed. Next. Accessible communication, speaking directly to the person with an intellectual disability as an adult, using plain, easy language, allowing time to understand and ask questions, making adjustments to communication as needed. Next, please. One easy to understand version. Most people prefer accessible documents, plain language, no jargon, simple and clear, to the point, relevant examples and pictures to help explain. Next slide, please. Self-advocate leadership. People with intellectual disabilities are included in all work, planning and design of programs, advisory groups and committees, as employees, as trainers. Self-advocate experience, expertise, guides our work. Next slide, please. Valuing the process. We ask questions and learn from each other. We role model what we want to see. We share what we want to learn and help others understand about inclusion and accessibility. Next slide, please. Okay, Ailish is going to talk about some examples from our network.
Thank you, Tia. Hello, everyone. Just checking that we have time, Kurt.
Yes,
Yep.
you're okay, Ailish.
Yep, sorry. My button wouldn't unmute.
Thank you very much. So just talking through a couple of examples from the Inclusion International Network about work that similar work that Tia has kind of outlined for us. So we have a member in Kenya, they're called Kai, and they have an access to justice program where they work with incarcerated people with intellectual disabilities and support them in planning when they leave prison and re-enter a community. So through that program, a self-advocate was in a lead role. She was a project manager, and her role involved interviewing incarcerated people, supporting them as they were planning to leave prison, and also advocating for their rights in government meetings. So she had a real leadership role and was able to support the people with intellectual disabilities in prison as they were moving into the community. Next, please. Kai have also, sorry, if you go back one, thank you. Kai also work with self-advocates from Kai also work as trainers, and they give peer support and training to people with intellectual disabilities about their rights and the support that they can ask for when they're involved with the justice system. They have also given training, self-advocates have given training to magistrates and lawyers and in communities about the rights of people with intellectual disabilities and the needs of people with intellectual disabilities when they're in the justice system. They also give communication support to people with intellectual disabilities when they're within the justice system. So, for example, help giving support whilst people are in court, helping to explain what's happening and helping to explain, for example, what lawyers or judges are saying. They also work with lawyers who give support, specialized support to people with intellectual disabilities who are victims in the cases where people with intellectual disabilities are victims. Next slide, please. So kind of a similar example from our member in Argentina, Fundación Visibilia. So they have given support to and training to police in 2 cities in Argentina. And that support has included developing protocols for how the police support victims and offenders with intellectual disabilities, and training on accessibility, so cognitive accessibility, how to work in and support and speak in an accessible way. They've also given training for judges and lawyers on similar things. They've worked to adapt laws into easy read, including laws around gender-based violence, so that people understand if a crime has been committed against them. And all of their work is done with self-advocates. So you can see in this picture, Domi from Fundación Visibilia giving some training there to the judges. Next slide, please. So I've just got a list here of a few more examples. I won't go through them all, but many of our members are doing work which is which follows the guidelines and the principles of listen, include, respect. And we can share this these slides with the participants, which has all the links in them. And I'll pass back to you, Kurt.
Great, thank you to both. And before we move on, I'd like to highlight and say a few words about the Canadian context. People with intellectual disabilities experience challenges with the Canadian justice system as victims of crime, as potential offenders, and as witnesses of crime. There has been increased recognition of the fact that persons with intellectual disabilities are at a greater risk, not only because of their disability, but also because of their experience in institutions, their over-regulations through the law, and a lack of accommodations. People with intellectual disabilities are 4 times more likely than people without a disability to be a victim of a violent crime. 65% of all violent crimes committed against persons with intellectual disabilities are committed by someone the person knows. And people with disabilities are twice as likely to experience domestic violence. People with intellectual disabilities are less likely to report a crime and less likely to be believed when they do report. For example, Inclusion Canada intervened at the Supreme Court of Canada in the Slatter case. The Slatter case involves a young woman with an intellectual disability who reported that she was sexually assaulted by her neighbor over several years. In this case, the trial judge believed her, but the Court of Appeal questioned whether she was suggestible because of her intellectual disability. The young woman won her case, but she was subject to overwhelming hurdles and invasive questioning. The Slatter case highlights how stereotypes about intellectual disability obstruct access to justice, and we want to ensure that this pattern no longer continues. People who are found guilty of committing a crime against people with an intellectual disability often do not receive adequate sentencing. Studies have found that less than 10% of all sexual assaults are reported to the police, and of the assaults reported, even fewer result in charges being laid. This gap is significantly higher for women with disabilities, with less than 4% of assaults reported to the police and charges rarely laid. People with intellectual disabilities are further victimized by the Canadian justice system because they are disproportionately subject to police violence. For example, Abdullah Darwish, who is autistic and nonverbal, was tasered and handcuffed by a Peel police officer in November of 2022. His father is now fighting for justice for his son, who is terrified to leave his house. While society perceives that police officers defend and protect the right of individuals, persons with an intellectual disability have different stories to share regarding their interaction with the police. Adopting the Listen, Include, Respect international guidelines is a stepping stone towards promoting meaningful participation and inclusion of persons with intellectual disabilities within our own Canadian justice system. Our hope today is to develop a greater understanding of the fact that persons with intellectual disabilities are disproportionately victimized in all spheres of their interactions with the Canadian justice system. However, this does not mean that we can't break the cycle and strive for meaningful change. With that, up next, we have Chris Rowley, the second Vice President of People First of Canada. Chris, you can come off mute and begin your presentation.
Thank you, Kurt. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Rowley. I'm the second Vice President of People First of Canada, and I live in Lethbridge, Alberta.
Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Chris as well. My name is Monica Schrader. I'm the National Project Coordinator for People First of Canada. So, Chris, a little while ago, you had an interaction with the police. Can you give us a little bit of context? Tell us a little bit about what was going on before and why the incident happened.
I am very interested in human rights. It's why I'm involved with People First of Canada and why I'm involved in my community. I'm a person with a disability. I know what it's like to be devalued in society. I want to fight for what's right, not only for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but for other vulnerable people in our society. So it was during the summer of 2022 in August, I'd been helping with the homeless encampment in my community. The police were there one day trying to move the people from the old YMCA property. The YMCA is not public property, but the park right next to it is. The homeless encampment had moved around a bit and were now on the YMCA property. The property is not being used. The Y closed down a while ago.
Okay, so that was the situation. While you were there, what were the police doing?
They were trying to get people to pack up and move. They were talking to people. They said that they were not going to throw away their coats and blankets that were there, but the police did it anyways. One of the cops threw the coats and blankets away. I asked the cop why he did it. I asked him why he lied. The cop told me to go somewhere else. He wanted me to leave. He told me to go somewhere else and advocate. But what I did was talk to the people I was helping and ask them if they wanted me to leave. They didn't, so I stayed.
Okay. So what happened after that then?
The cop asked me what it would take to get me to leave. I told him he would have to tell me why he was being a jerk or just arrest me. This is how it came out of my mouth at the time in the moment. I wanted to know why he was treating these people so badly. I just wanted the cops to leave them alone. I was a bit of a tense situation. Finally, the cop decided to arrest me.
Okay. So, Chris, what was it like for you being arrested?
I was fine with that. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was the first time I've been arrested. I was not afraid. It was not rough or anything. Once I was cuffed, I disclosed my disability to the cop. I did this so the police can better understand me, but it was up to each individual if they want to disclose or not. And when they do it during the process, I asked him to clarify what I was being arrested for. I asked the question 5 different times over about 20 minutes before I got an answer. The cops were discussing what ticket to give me or what charge to charge me with.
Okay, so in the end, what were you charged with or ticketed for?
I was given a ticket for trespassing. There is a fine to pay. I wasn't the only one who got a ticket. Some of the people in the encampment were given tickets. That makes no sense to me. They are homeless. How can they pay a ticket? Why even give them a ticket? What does that accomplish? Who does that help? I was also really upset at the way the police treated the people in the encampment. A person asked the cop where they were supposed to go. The cop answered, "Go behind a dumpster." this cop was just devaluing the most vulnerable people in our society. It made me very upset. It was frustrating. And when the cop got angry at me and told me to go somewhere else and advocate, I wanted to just talk to him. I wanted to tell him how this is the place where people need to advocate, right here in the community where people are experiencing homelessness right before our eyes.
Okay. Chris, I know you've shared this story before, but can you please tell us what happened or what helped you to be able to go through this whole process in your efforts to help people without housing in your community? What helped you?
The first thing is I had to support myself. I had a person to help me through all this. They helped me a lot during all of this. Having a support system is important. Knowing who could help and having someone to talk to about all of this was all this, who was on my side. The whole thing was very frustrating. There needs to be an overall better understanding of vulnerable people like those without housing. The rules need to change so that their humanity is recognized and respected. The police commission is also another place to tell your story and be heard. I went to the police commission open house. I told them my story there, and I also used the police complaint system to put in my complaint about the incident.
Okay. So as we heard today already, people with an intellectual disability sometimes have a bad experience when they report a crime to the police. Thinking about all that you've been through yourself, what's your advice for the police?
I think they just need to listen more and really understand where the person is coming from and have some compassion to the situation they're in. They need to not devalue people with disabilities or homeless people. Everybody has the same value. And police need to listen. They can't just act without listening to us. And then there is a need for more understanding. Police need a better understanding of mental health issues that can arise so that they can interact in a way that is respectful to people's human rights.
Okay, last question for you, Chris. Are there any final thoughts on this incident that you want to pass along?
I think the biggest thing for me is just understanding that we need to just understand that we're humans and make a connection with each other and really understand that some people learn different and need those accommodations that the listen, include, and respect talked about. And I think as we move forward with the listen, include, and respect, that people need to just take that to heart. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you to both. And before we continue on, I'm gonna just a quick apology. When I was describing Abdullah Darwish, I described Abdullah Darwish as someone who is artistic and nonverbal. What I should have said was an autistic person who does not use words to communicate. My apologies. I hadn't updated my script to appropriately. But moving on, thank you again, Monica and Chris. From here, we're going to go to Vivian Thickett, a parent from Saskatchewan. So Vivian, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vivian Thickett. I work for the RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I am also a parent. My youngest son is Kyle. He is 31. He worked part-time at a snowmobile dealership, and he loves to volunteer. He is currently working off-site for one of our local paper mills. Kyle has an intellectual disability. I asked his permission to share our story today, and he has agreed.
Thanks, Vivian. So what would you like to share about Kyle's experience with the justice system?
When Kyle was volunteering at a local homeless shelter, his coat was stolen. The coat meant a lot to Kyle. It was personalized coat that Kyle had saved up for. It cost him about $600, and it was a pretty big purchase for Kyle. He was very proud of that coat. Because of my role within the RCMP, the police, when Kyle's jacket was stolen, we reported it. I wanted Kyle to know that he had access to recourse when people harmed him. I wanted Kyle to be taken seriously. Kyle's coat eventually turned up when the person who stole it was arrested and was wearing the coat at the time. We had the coat professionally cleaned, but Kyle refused to wear it again. The person who had stolen Kyle's coat had stolen other things as well. He was charged with 6 other crimes at that time. Kyle was offered the opportunity to participate in the court proceedings. He was asked to write a victim impact statement or to tell the judge how he was impacted by the robbery. Kyle and I prepared his victim impact statement together. He spoke, I wrote. We got the job done. And on the day of the trial, the person who stole Kyle's coat changed his plea to guilty. At sentencing, Kyle was offered the opportunity to speak.
And thanks, Vivian. And as we have an international audience, the RCMP is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that is the National Police Service of Canada. So Vivian, can you tell us a bit about Kyle's experience testifying in court?
Kyle did a great job. We took turns speaking, and he got to tell the accused that he wanted him to be punished for what he did. He got to say, "You stole my coat," and I'm not very happy about that. And he was taken seriously. Kyle was well supported that day. Kyle was told what to expect, and there were no surprises for him in the courtroom. Everyone involved spoke in plain language. Kyle understood what the judge was saying, and Kyle had me there to support him. I know Kyle, and I know the ins and outs of the justice system in Canada. I felt prepared to support Kyle. The judge made sure that Kyle was respected. The accused had turned his back to Kyle, and the judge made sure that the accused turned around, made eye contact with Kyle while he spoke. At the end of the proceedings, Kyle was validated by others. He was told he did a good job. He was told that he was an asset to the proceedings. He was told that he mattered.
Thank you, Vivian. It's so nice to have a positive example in the Canadian context. And you mentioned that you work for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In your experience, is Kyle's story typical? Is it the norm?
Absolutely not. I could speak at length about all the ways in which our justice system fails people like Kyle. Kyle wasn't brushed off like so many other people are. Because I'm his mom, he wasn't told it's just a coat. Here in Saskatchewan, we've seen far more serious crimes like sexual assault not be taken seriously because of the way that people with an intellectual disability communicate, that they've been harmed. This is an even bigger risk for people who are unable to use spoken word. I made sure that Kyle was supported which also isn't the norm. Don't get me wrong, I believe that all parents do their best to support their kids, but not everyone has the know-how. Victim services is very underfunded in Saskatchewan. I didn't trust that victim services would have been equipped to support Kyle or even to support me in supporting Kyle. I knew which accommodations Kyle could ask for. I have seen other parents abandon court cases because of logistical concerns that just aren't realistic to their family. The justice system is not easy to navigate, and people shouldn't have to go digging for accommodations. I'm here today to tell our story because I want people to know that it is possible to do this well. We just need to raise the bar.
And we are really appreciative of your willingness to share Kyle's experiences and Kyle's for giving you permission to do that. So we know listen, include, respect is about supporting people in the moment and also about making organizations more inclusive. Is it important that self-advocates and families be included in this reform process, Vivian?
Yes, definitely. We'd be more prepared to support all victims and survivors of crime if we were prepared to support the Kyles of the world. And how better to do that than by learning from people with intellectual disabilities and their families directly. And when I think about the big picture, I also have to wonder if greater access to justice could reduce rate of violent victimization for people with an intellectual disability. If all people with an intellectual disability were taken seriously when they reported a crime, no matter how big or how small, would people start to think twice about harming people with an intellectual disability? Would crime rates actually drop? I think my takeaway from this is we need all people with an intellectual disability to be told that they matter, just like Kyle was told that he matters. We need for that message to spread to all Canadians. And if listen, include, respect can help us get there, then let's get to work.
Thank you so much, Vivian. I appreciate your words, and I think now it's really important to invite Ailish and Tia again from Inclusion International to comment on the potential application of the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines. Ailish and Tia?
Thank you, Kat. Tia, do you have any feedback after hearing Chris and Vivian's story? What do you feel their stories show about the Canadian justice system, and what do you think, how do you think Listen, Include, Respect might be able to help?
Well, first of all, I think some of the problem is that police officers or other people in the justice system don't know about disability. And so part of that is our training about what intellectual disability is and how they can maybe communicate better with people with disabilities. And people with disabilities need to be trained around the justice system. I feel that sometimes people don't know what to do when they're in a situation that happens in the justice system and they don't have education around that themselves. So how could we communicate better with the justice system, learning and educating them and by people with disabilities. And have that role model. And then how could people with disabilities learn about the justice system and what to do if they're in a situation, if they're in trouble, things like that, who to call, to know that they have rights, and that they are able to have an opportunity to talk to somebody, that they know when if they're being arrested, or if they don't understand something, that they're allowed to make a phone call and what their rights are.
Thank you, Tia. Yeah, you mentioned there some of the different parts of listen, include, respect that might be useful, and you mentioned them in your presentation. And I think hearing Vivian and Chris's story, we can see very clearly how some of those basic how-to lists, checklists might be useful for people working in the justice system, but also how taking on some of the principles of listen, include, respect might be useful for the system as a whole. And it was great to hear Vivian, as someone who works in the justice system, talking about how important it is to have self-advocate leadership in making those changes and helping systems to become inclusive.
And it was also great that Vivian was able to help her son speak out. A lot of parents also don't know the justice system, as she said, and some of their rules and things like that. So people also with disabilities get scared and then decide not to file charges or not to know how to act when they are falsely accused or arrested, or if they are arrested, about their rights. So that's why it's important for both sets, all of the people, to be educated and the justice system to learn about people with disabilities, because sometimes they don't even interact a lot with people with disabilities. And that this is a way that if they can go through some training with people with disabilities around listen, include, respect, to learn about people with disabilities and how to interact with people, and to show them that there's different documents that they might need explained in a different way or talked about a different way. So there's education on both sides.
Thank you, Tia. We'll hand back to you, Kurt. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers for their insightful presentations. Really grateful. This is a bit of a historic moment, introducing these guidelines. Generally, this is the first point for listen, include, respect in a Canadian criminal justice setting, and we are truly grateful. So with that, I would like to remind everyone that we will now open the floor for questions. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or by emailing them to forum@inclusioncanada.ca. So we have a few minutes to do this. Let's see if I have a first question, and we'll get this started. Okay, let's start with a question for Chris Rowley. Chris, is it important that other self-advocates know, sorry. Let's see, we're still waiting for questions to come in. My apologies, Chris.
Please.
Do we have any questions? Okay. Chris, let's try that again. Did you know you were going to disclose your disability to the police?
No, it was very situational for me, and it was very in the moment. And so when I got arrested, they put me in the back of the van and were trying to decide what ticket to write me with. And then when they decided, he was going through the paperwork with me and saying you have to stay away from the place 100 meters. And I'm like, okay, 100 meters, what does that mean? Because the library's across from the street. Am I excluded from the library now? And he wouldn't answer that question. And I'm like, well, I have a disability. I need to know, I need that help to understand what you're telling me to do. And he would not answer. It took another officer coming to talk to me to answer the question. And I did finally get the answer. And so I was not prepared to disclose, but in the situation I did.
Wow. I'm sorry that was your experience, Chris, but I do have another follow-up, a bit of a follow-up on that. And do you think it's important that other self-advocates know their right to be accommodated in the justice system?
Yes, it's very important that they know. And for me, I had training from the John Humphrey Center. So when I went in doing this advocacy work, I kind of knew what to expect. And so I think it's very important that they do know their rights within the criminal justice system and understand that they do have rights. So it's very important. And I think one of the pieces with listen and include and respect is training for individuals on what those rights are with police. And please understand that we do have some of those unique rights that aren't for everybody because we learn differently and we have those different things. And so when I did my report to the police of how I was treated and stuff, their investigation showed that they had enough training, that nothing was really wrong. And the training they have is around autism and how to deal with somebody with autism. And so it's very limited training. And so I love that we're talking about this and have the opportunity to share my experience. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. That's an excellent segue into a question for Tia and Ailish. So listen, include, respect. Does this program offer support people to accompany an accused person in and through court proceedings, or is it more of an educational tool? So that's a question for Ailish and Tia.
Thank you very much, Kat, and thank you for the question. So listen, include, respect are international guidelines around they're for organizations, and they're about how to be inclusive and accessible, and they're for all types of organizations, so not just organizations that work in the justice system. So the program itself is a tool about inclusion and participation and accessibility. So we would not offer support services to people who are going to court. However, many of our members, including Inclusion Canada, are familiar with Listen, Include, Respect and may be able to signpost to those sort of services if they exist in countries. Is there anything you'd like to add, Tia, to that?
Yeah, I think very much what you said. I think that there are some other advocacy groups too that do support people with the justice system if they need that, but also just the tools of teaching somebody about what an intellectual disability is and how to communicate with them if needed. They can use some of our information on in Listen, Include, Respect to do that, to educate them.
Great point. Thank you very much, Tia. And thank you, Ailish. Now the questions are starting to come in and they are being spread around our speakers. So I do have a question for Vivian. So Vivian, if you could turn your camera on. And your question is, how important is disclosure of disability when it comes to police work? Wouldn't it be helpful to the police to know so that so they know that someone might require an accommodation?
It's very important. Just knowing what's going on with someone will give the police an instant insight as to how they need to communicate with this person. The RCMP is currently, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is currently in the process of developing training for that. A new victim card was released today for everybody to use when they're speaking with victims. But yes, disclosure is really important. And again, that's if the person who is the victim or the person who is accused, that's a choice that they need to make. And we have to respect that.
Excellent. Thank you, Vivian. And we're going to go back to Tia and Ailish. So I'll give them a second before I read the question to get ready. But okay. So Tia and Ailish, how can people learn more about the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines and how to use them?
You can go on listenincouldraspect.com. We have the guidelines on there on the website.
Awesome. And Ailish?
If you have any other questions about Listen, Include, Respect, you can contact Inclusion Canada, or you can contact us, and we can support you in different ways. We've got a services that we are setting up, which helps organizations with getting in contact with self-advocates who might be able to give them advice or support. So for example, if you have a policy that you think needs to be reviewed by self-advocates, we can support with connecting your organization to self-advocates who are trained to do that. We also have training, which we will be able to share, self-led training, which will be online and is available to our members. Yeah, thanks, Kurt.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Tia and Ailish. So I think that's it. We are right on time. It's been, I just want to thank you all again for your participation today. It's been a real privilege to host this first Canadian Listen, Include, Respect training session for victims and survivors of Crime Week. Again, thank you, Justice Canada. And we really hope that this webinar has provided valuable insights into the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines and the importance of inclusive practices within our justice system. Please remember to fill out the post-webinar survey, which will help us gather feedback and improve future events. The recording of this webinar will be made available for further dissemination. Thank you once again, and you all have a great day.